Okay, so yesterday we talked through, you read and discussed in small groups some of what you saw as the initial legal issues or moral issues of some examples there. You have the handout now just as a reminder then when you're reviewing that we talked about this idea, whether this was assault, that was what that person was charged with, whether it was assault or not. Was one of those questions there. When we were looking at the infant, where doctors had made a medical determination, but parents were trying to find ways to kind of challenge those decisions. And so, the family went to court, or was going to use court to challenge a medical diagnosis. That the court is a method for mediating conflict among us at different levels, and you'll end up learning about the different court types and their levels of things. This one here we're going to read together, and kind of like you did in your small groups where you kind of picked out what you thought were the relevant parts. We're going to read this one as a group, but on your own individual page, I'd like you to kind of, as we go along, write down what you think is relevant, okay? So you're going to try what you did with your group. So here's the background for this one. A Winnipeg man underwent major surgery, though there were medical concerns about his health, possibly compromising the surgery or his recovery period. So even before he underwent that surgery, he had significant health issues. For example, if it's, you guys may have seen in like medical drama television shows, if somebody's on a transplant list, to get onto a transplant list, you have to otherwise be exhibiting fairly good health. People that are in their 70s and older are less likely to be able to be accepted on a transplant list because, the organ that they might receive won't last very long. Or, for example, there is kind of a thing where red tattoo ink affects surgery issues or scanning issues or something. Have any of you heard about that? No. So there's some people that cannot be accepted on a transplant list simply because of the color of tattoo ink that they've used. A doctor making a medical determination about whether someone should be accepted on a transplant list or accept an organ that's available to them based on their lifestyle, right? If they're a smoker or a drinker, or, have a criminal record, things like that. And again, there have to be some legal boundaries of what a doctor can do or not do that's justified, stuff like that. Anyway, this guy had poor health. He still had major surgery, and major surgery gives you the idea that there's a lot of post-surgery care, like it's significant. Maybe it was open heart, and you can't just go home after that, right, and look after yourself. So there were concerns before he even had the surgery. He was pressured, bullied, as his family claims, by the hospital to leave after only 2 days of recovery. Once he left the hospital, he suffered a stroke hours later. He's now paralyzed on one side of his body, unresponsive. He's unable to speak. He was also blind prior to the surgery, so now being mute is another further significant challenge for him. So then the question that I want you to consider while we read it, the question is, should the hospital hold liability and pay a financial penalty for their wrongdoing? And if I use the word liability, who would want to help me explain or share with us what you think liability means? Marissa? Responsibility. It is a responsibility, but it is like a penalty responsibility in a way, right?
You're responsible for the action. I mean, that's what liable means.
Yes, responsible. So, like, we don't use the word liability interchangeably with responsible. I'm responsible for monitoring that door. But if there was damage that occurred in this classroom when I was the one that was responsible there, it's a penalty responsible. Like there's a cost that I might incur or a penalty that I might face if I didn't uphold my responsibility. So it has like a penalty kind of attached to it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Liability insurance, right? It is a penalty that you're trying to reduce the penalty. Anyway, so that's the question, whether or not the hospital by their actions are financially responsible or legally responsible for any wrongdoing on their part. Did they bully him? Did they pressure him to leave before it was medically appropriate for him to leave? And what might have been the pressures there if they needed the beds or things like that, right? And that's not really a justifiable reason for releasing care of a patient, right? And then you can also consider why a case like this would lead to the hospital paying out rather than somebody facing a criminal charge. And so this is the difference between a civil case versus the criminal charges. And those are two different distinctions of what we'll talk about as well as far as the law goes. You know, if it's person to person or damage from one person to the other, that's civil stuff for the most part. It's also not, this stuff here has to be part of the criminal code. Are you trying to like peel it super slow?
I was going to.
Yeah, you gave yourself away when you were looking for an audience there. Okay, so we're going to read through some of it, not the whole thing. And like I said, I'd like to see you jot down what you think are some of the relevant details about this case so that you can contribute to the discussion. So patient released from Winnipeg Hospital suffers a stroke. A Winnipeg man's ordeal after undergoing brain surgery. So that might seem a significant part of this. He had brain surgery. This is raising questions about the discharge policies for patients who undergo major procedures at the city's largest hospital. He was 60 years old. He had a brain tumor that was surgically removed at the Health Science Center on October 8th. The surgery was considered high risk because he is blind, but he had also suffered from heart problems. So a lot of significant problems. You know, the brain, the tumor was likely fatal if it wasn't removed, and therefore that would be the reason why you would go ahead with it even though he had significant health issues. So when you look at this kind of detail, is there anything that comes to mind? I kind of asked you not to eat that. So,
Thank you.
okay, what comes to mind here?
That he already had high risk before even undergoing.
It was high risk before undergoing it?
So like results of having something bad happen, what we're high in.
Yes, predictable, you might use the word. So, you know, predictable danger, I guess. And with that, you know, you talk about liability of hospital. You know, it's pretty clear that the hospital has a legal responsibility for a very high level of care, especially if it's a patient already presenting with a lot of issues, right? It's not the same as, say, somebody coming in after a car accident and you doing major surgery as an emergency measure when there weren't foreseeable or predictable health dangers and it going poorly. Then you could say, well, it wasn't foreseeable what would have occurred. You know, he has a stroke on the table. Here it was foreseeable, right? Older man, not healthy, some significant health issues as well. A serious surgery. Like, can you just imagine that you are having brain surgery and you're sent home? You do it on a Monday and you're sent home on Wednesday, for example. So so you talk about, and again, I mentioned the word reasonable is a big part of the legal world, because what sounds reasonable? And then there's even different levels of reasonable. For a layman or just like the general public, there's what seems reasonable, like, okay, maybe give the guy 3 days, a week, whatever, for brain surgery. But when you're talking about reasonable in the medical world, now you're talking about what's reasonable to trained professionals, right? And so it's not just what's reasonable to the first 100 people you ask on the street. Now it's what's reasonable to 100 doctors who perform brain surgeries, right? Who have an informed trained level of understanding because they know the predictability of what can happen. So those are some of the issues that you should be thinking about. And I'll tell you that the law class is very much about that kind of whole picture thinking. There are many parts to it. It's not just here's information and here's the levels of court. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, a lot of questioning or critical thinking that goes into the law class. So his family told CBC News on October 10th, so it was 2 days later, after less than 2 days recuperating from that successful surgery, that the hospital issued a discharge order. Relatives said that he was still bleeding behind one ear and had 60 staples in his head. After 3 more days of battling with the hospital over wanting to stay to recuperate further, he agreed to leave and was discharged on the morning of October 13th. So it's 2 days he was suggested to leave, or it should have happened, and family were able to delay it for 3 more days. Administrators at the Health Science Center said that he was medically stable when he was released. So he would have been assessed by a doctor. A doctor would have signed off on his form to release, and it probably would have had some administration that oversaw it. So that's another part of this. If we're talking about liability, you're talking about negligence cases, not criminal. If we are talking about liability, you could write this down. We're talking about negligence. Negligence has a formal name in the law system. It's called tort law. Tort. And with tort law, negligence, there are levels of responsibility. Right? A doctor is going to sign off, and then it's going to go to an administrator, that kind of stuff, on and on. So if the hospital ends up sued by the family, for example, a doctor may not pay out the same. If a judge found them liable of negligence, a doctor may pay out less than, say, the hospital, for example, because the hospital holds the greater responsibility. They hired the doctor. They supervise and oversee the doctor. So there's different levels of liability, levels of responsibility or liability. He had a stroke on the way home. So that's pretty important, that he was assessed to be medically stable leaving, but had a stroke within hours. A significant enough stroke that it caused permanent damage. He returned to Health Science Center, and when the article was published here, he was still there. His family said that he's now paralyzed on a side of his body, now unable to speak, and was unresponsive at the time. So that could potentially, stroke effects, if not dealt with quickly, are long-lasting, right? The longer you go without care and treatment from a stroke, the more permanent the damage.
Aren't strokes a big risk when doing brain surgery?
Yes.
Anyway, it's a big risk.
For sure. For sure,
so
yeah.
It could happen to.
Yeah, because you're adjusting the thickness of your blood, for surgery. They would use things that would thicken the blood and that kind of stuff. And if you're someone that already had, like it had mentioned, heart problems, you will also run, not even just, so a stroke is a clot in your brain, but you can also have a stroke in your lungs.
Overall, it was pretty high risk.
It was very high risk. Yes. So then once you even, especially too, when you look at liability, okay, there's levels of responsibility. But on the other side, on the patient side, they're also taking a risk, because he asked for the surgery. He was there to get the surgery. And another part of, when you're talking about doctors specifically, there is something that's part of the Hippocratic Oath, where there is the duty to consent, or informed consent is what we would talk about. Right? You can't, as a doctor, you can't go in and perform a procedure on a patient who hasn't been fully vetted or fully informed about everything they need to know, reasonably need to know about the procedure, what you're going to do, what the outcome possibly could be. You know, a woman doesn't go into some kind of a surgery for cancer and then come out and her uterus is gone. She has no potential to have children after that surgery, unless a doctor has said, okay, it's potential. This might happen if we get in there and we find whatever. So you have to have had that full discussion with the patient and covered what they reasonably need to know, and you get what's an informed consent. And the example I can give is that my mother went in for a procedure at one point. She had had the procedure one time previously, and she was put under an anesthetic. She was put under an anesthetic, so she didn't experience anything of what happened in the surgical room. When she went in for the second procedure, you know, she went in there and they performed this procedure, but she was not put under. She was awake for the whole thing, and it was she thought it was humiliating. Made her very uncomfortable. And as a daughter, to hear that, I was so angry, because also I understand a bit of the law, and I know that's a pretty simple conversation for a doctor to say. You know, today or for these procedures, you know, when we're doing them now, we don't find that the risk is necessary to put you under, so we don't, unless you prefer. You know, there's a conversation.
Yeah, like the difference from being put under, like completely,
Yes.
to being whatever.
A local or whatever.
Yeah, like
Yes.
it's not probably a big difference from when they still have to take the time to give you an anesthetic.
Yeah.
Compared to putting you under. It probably.
I'm sure it wasn't time related or money related,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, but for her it just was, you know, yeah, it was really difficult to hear. So already we've talked about a lot of legal issues that we'll come back to, but when we're talking about, you know, this one in particular, like the neighbor that cut off the treetops, that also was civil stuff, but that was one person suing another person, private nuisance, you know, or damages. Negligence is damages. Here we're talking a much significant harm, obviously, and we're talking about, you know, trained people with a much higher level of responsibility. There's also like, I just saw a video, we just were flipping through videos last night, and I saw a video where there was you guys know, like windmills, great, like wind turbines or whatever they call them, power generators, right? So the what would you call them? The pedals on those things are massive. Like they're longer than the back of a semi-truck, right? And in this video, there was one of those big long pedals on the back of a semi, but they didn't really calculate a turn or something. And so they kind of got caught up, but it was at the crossing of a railway.
Oh, I see that.
Did you see that?
I saw this.
And the pilot truck was stopped in front of them, and it was a semi-driver that was recording it, and he was like, oh my God. And they didn't get out of there soon enough, and the train hit the end. Yeah, so it damaged the train, it damaged the pedal of the wind turbine or whatever.
I've actually passed a truck with the turbine on the trailer.
They're massive. But I'll tell you what, whoever took on the job, the semi-driver that took on that job and the pilot, they took on a higher level of responsibility, knowing that it was a more ominous or whatever, like the size of the thing that they were transporting made their job more difficult. And therefore they would have topped up liability, like they should, if they were smart, bought more insurance. For example, the people that knock down houses, it's not just anybody that's got a big machine. You know, you have a certain level of responsibility, the same as doctors, right? There's a new TV show that came out that has the Canadian actor in it. He was from Dawson's Creek. What's his name?
Oh, no, he's not.
Yeah, Van City.
Oh, no, he's from Canada?
Yes,
Oh,
he was in Dawson's Creek. He's in the new TV show Dr. Death. Have any of you seen that or watched it? I wonder if it's a show that we can incorporate into this, because essentially, you know, doctors have to be insured, right? Their insurance companies have to insure doctors before a hospital will let them perform surgeries in their hospital. Otherwise, the hospital's liable. And in this case, this guy was damaging patients, but rather than deal with admit that he was damaging patients and have to pay out to patients. Hospitals just kept moving him on. And eventually a couple other doctors had to correct the surgeries that he was botching, and they tried to raise the alarm, and it took a long time to deal with it. So there's doctors as well have different liabilities. Okay, anyway, you've got some things written down there. You know, the negligence, the liability, tort law, different levels of liability.
Were we supposed to just write down?
You just jot things down like I did, yeah. It says here that Van documented his fears about being prematurely discharged in a handwritten note dated 2 days before he left the hospital. So he was even concerned prior to the surgery. Among his written reasons for wanting to remain in care, he said, "The surgeon said I may not survive the surgery. I have heart problems, no stabilized blood chemistry," which meant that he couldn't go back on his heart medication. But it's not known if any of the staff at that facility saw the note. The family is accusing him, the hospital, of badgering him to leave, and said he was told that he would have to pay for his continued hospital care out of his own pocket if he didn't leave by the discharge day. That sounds like pressure. I think it became a pissing contest between the doctor and my brother, said the brother of the patient. They threatened to bring an accountant down, and his anxiety went through the roof. This is a guy with a heart problem who is blind, and his head was held together with staples. He dared to challenge the authority of the hospital, and that's when it got ugly. The chief operating officer of that facility apologized to the family, admits that the hospital handled the case badly, and I'll tell you something right there. If they've admitted it, then they've already accepted liability. You know, if you ever watch medical shows, and they're fairly popular, there's always new medical shows coming out. The new interns that are getting trained by doctors are, you know, it'll be your human nature to want to apologize to the family of someone who's been damaged, even if you had nothing to do with their care. You might just be informing because you were there, or you're the attending or whatever, but they'll train you to say that you can never say sorry. Sorry comes with an admitted liability. And so if you say sorry, you might face penalty from your insurance provider or from the hospital staff.
That and making a promise,
yes, you can't say, we'll fix this or whatever, because there
police
is...
officers can't do that either. They can't, if somebody murders, a family member, the police can't say, we'll get this person, I promise.
Yes, and that might be it's kind of like the hero complex. You want to do that, that's why you're in that line of work, but again, it can come back and it can hurt you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's one example. Now we're going to go to a different country. China. And this is just recent. This just came out 2 days ago.
Is that Raid Shadow Legends?
Pardon?
No, it's not that.
Oh, you're looking at the game? Okay, so now we're at the bottom of the screen here. China has created a new law. What's that? Did you guys discuss it?
Yeah.
There you go. That's great to hear. You're discussing the stuff coming up in the news. China's created a new law that's restricting the amount of time that children can play on video games, and this is 18 years and younger, or up to 18 years, I guess. It has reduced that time to 1 hour, and they can only play it in the weekend window from Friday night over to Sunday. Could you imagine if your government told you you can only play a game for an hour a week? But what's interesting is... What's that?
It wouldn't really shake me.
No, you're not yeah. This is also a reduced amount from a previous restriction on time spent gaming, because previously I think it was 3 hours, but we'll see. China, of course, is a government that issues much more control over the lives of people in that country, their citizens. And you'll recall that I don't think it's still a law, but it was at one time called the One-Child Law. Does anybody want to tell us what they think that was about?
Yeah.
I heard about this.
What's it about?
This was a while ago.
It is a while. No, I'm just bringing it up as an example of the level of control that they can exert. For example, Canada, something like that, I can't see would be constitutional or valid. What was it, Jackson?
I just heard that China was way overpopulated. So
Yes.
they restricted people from having more than one child, and
Yes,
what it says right there is that they would have a penalty, that they'd have to pay fees if
yes,
they go over one child.
yes.
Which makes sense. China's very high populated.
Yes, and has a set number of resources, right? So that's a really important point, and it kind of comes to what I've got over here on the side is related to worldview. For China, that law kind of made sense because it benefited everybody. You know, there wasn't space for all these kids. There weren't the resources to feed all these kids. There's the pollution issues and all of that kind of stuff, right? Now, the way that people or citizens responded to that, you know, yes, they would abide by it, but there were stories, all sorts of Chinese adoption agencies with young girls, baby girls. Because if you're only going to be allowed one child, you want it to be a male child. Again, we're talking about a different culture, a different worldview, and the value placed on a boy or a girl. And part of it was because in their culture, so there's the grandparents, and then they'll have, you know, a child who then marries someone, and they'll have a child. For example, the one child that they're allowed to have, it's the grandparents that raise the grandchild, and then these guys go out and make the money, and they all live, well, actually, it should look like that. They all live together in the same house. There is a cultural element to it. And even when this boy gets married, the girl moves in with his family, you know, there is a tradition to all of it. And so if suddenly you're having your first child as a girl, well, it means that you're not able to maintain the income, really. There is a part to it socially, right? So what was happening then is when they're having baby girls, you know, there might be the bowl of ash beside the bed. Have you heard about that? They just smother it. Or people go to the hospital and have twins, a boy and a girl. They'll pay the fee to leave with the boy, but the girl will stay. So there are adoption agencies just full of young girls. And I had the great pleasure of working with a really wonderful teacher at John Lake School in Saskatoon. And he and his wife adopted two girls from China. They went over and got the one. And then a couple years later, they went over and got another. And he said, and you maybe have heard these stories from other people, they were treated like celebrities. People came up to them recognizing the Canada flag on their backpack or things, seeing them walk around with this little Chinese baby, and they were so thankful to these people that were giving a home to their daughters, essentially. And you can imagine, because maybe they themselves had to leave a baby girl somewhere, right? Just a different mentality to things. Were there some comments here? You wanted to say something, and maybe you did.
Well, I was just gonna say, it's crazy how like their society has like, it's just lots of different laws, it's way more restricted, and
Yes.
like, I don't know,
I'll be the next day.
There is another part to this. You know, we are coming with our worldview from a country that's only just 150 plus years old.
yeah.
We are very young. They've had centuries that they've been building and defending their power, right? Even in China, they've had those work camps. Actually, they call them re-education camps. It is very much like that. So, and this is the true history that's people write stories. You know, I read a novel here by a Canadian author, and she talked about that, where, you know, somebody can be professionally trained, have a family in one province of the territory, but they make the mistake of, you know, attending a rally to some politician or whatever. And if they're just seen, they can be given notice that suddenly the husband of that family has got to work in a province that's 8 hours away, and it's as you're told. And so suddenly a family is split up, and they may not see him for 12 years, 20 years. It's re-education stuff, right? They're made to work. They're not given adequate food. Like, it is very, very difficult, right?
Yeah.
So China has just there are different things that can be, citizens will accept, and I think that's in here somewhere. So consider what it says about the priorities of the government, the long-term effects that they're hoping for, whether Canada ever issues these types of restrictions for young people as well. Can anybody think offhand of limitations that Canada has set for young people?
Do they even have,
Pardon?
do they have?
Canada, I don't think has a limitation on like how long you can game, but I'm thinking of other limitations, and some have been most
Like age
recently.
restrictions
There are age, like what?
on that, some of the games, I think there is the same.
Oh, like that?
It's not
But
really age.
it wouldn't be the
restriction,
government.
It's more just age recommendation. It's
And
not
that would
like
be
a movie.
by the gaming,
Yeah,
yes.
It's by like the company. It's like a movie, like
Yes.
where it'll say 14A or PG.
Yes, okay, Canada does have something to do with that because, well, they're setting a standard for how old you have to be to see
Yeah.
certain ratings, and then it's up to cinemas, and if they
Yeah,
routinely
if
let
there's
underage.
an R-rated movie.
Yes.
Say if I was like 12 and I walked in there, I don't think they would let me in.
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with that. Do you have to give proof of your age, or if your parent took you in, or you
I
let?
never, it's just,
So it's not really monitored.
it's just.
Oh, suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know sometimes.
Okay,
You
Marissa.
Restrictions for young people would be like buying alcohol, smoke, like cigarette packs, or there's like since they legalized marijuana, there's that too. And probably on medication as well.
And another one that we'll add here is vaping.
Yeah.
Just last week, the Saskatchewan government has issued that they'll be increasing the tax on vaping just in general. And they use these taxes as, what's the word for it? Like they tax the things that they feel are not healthy for people. So like junk food is taxed, pop, things like that, you know. But taxes on vaping and things like that is a hindrance kind of. But there's an additional part to that, and we'll talk about that maybe tomorrow. Will probably be the day. But they've just issued as well that vaping is going on not, for example, when I get gas at the Hanley gas station there, they've got vaping products there, but I think they won't be able to sell them anymore. The fruit ones, so there's the ones that are made to kind of target youth, won't be available for sale anymore from just regular vendors. They'll only be sold at adult vaping stores as an example. So yeah, Canada does lay out some restrictions for that kind of stuff. They're also here, if gaming companies themselves are the ones responsible for policing the time, would Canada benefit from implementing some sort of restriction for online use for children? What would you guess is the reasoning for China implementing this? It was previously 3 hours, but now it's 1 hour a week. What are they hoping to get out of this?
More work, more like
Less fat kids.
Yes.
Less fat kids?
more.
I'm not sure it's about more work, but that's a good guess.
more useful people. Like,
Yes,
More intelligent.
intelligence. Yeah, that their concern is intelligence. Their concern is that too many young people are kind of falling into a negative habit that's going to have long-lasting effects on them of just, kind of zoning out. And they want to make sure that, if you think about the reliance they have on their workforce, that they want people that are, they're not just gamers for young people, for example. So we could just jump to a bit of, we're not going to read the whole thing here, but online gamers under the age of 18 will only be allowed to play for an hour on Fridays, weekends, and holidays. Yeah, I guess so, right? And you might think about what new games developers will create, knowing that in China, which is a huge market, so it's worth developing a specific kind of game, that they'll only get that hour. The National Press and Publication Administration told state-run news agency that game playing would only be allowed between 8 and 9 p.m., so they're really restricting it by the time.
Only play that.
Yeah. It also instructed gaming companies to prevent children playing outside of these times. So they're in order for those games to be allowable on their Chinese internet, for example, they have to follow that rule. And so that's another part of this, that they have that control over it. For example, if you've ever loaded something up on YouTube with different songs in the background, like the grad video, for example, sometimes it comes up for me that those videos are restricted in certain countries. And China, Syria, North Korea are some of the places that will block that video because for a specific song, for example. Or actually, if you go, I think it's, because I haven't done this for a while, but if you go google.cn, it's Chinese Google. There are things you won't find on this. You know, if you're in China, there are websites that are available on the internet that you just won't know about. The same as like Saudi Arabia. You know, what was it? There was some kind of like a ball tournament or a hockey tournament, and Canadian teachers that are living there teaching Canadian children or whatever of diplomats couldn't watch those games because the internet can be blocked in many of those countries. North Korea is the most censored country in the world, we know, right? And again, it goes into the whole conversation, and it's important that we're focusing on this part of it, is this worldview. Every society will have different reasons for the laws that they create, and it's their culture and their background that will dictate whether citizens will accept those laws or not. Or it's their culture or their background that will determine whether the citizens even have a say in accepting those laws. The citizens that don't accept China's laws try to, immigrate when they're at the Olympics, right? That's a thing that happens a lot. Do you guys know about that? Have you heard about that? Chinese Olympic athletes get, they can win a significant amount of money if they medal. Every athlete does from their country, for example. But it's a popular concern or problem at the Olympics, because if you're a citizen of a country that wouldn't normally give you permission to leave the country because they have that control, but you're the athlete representing that country, it has happened many times where Olympic athletes ask for asylum in the country where the Olympics are held so that they don't have to return to their home country. It's happened often. Yep. So, earlier this month, a state media outlet branded online games as spiritual opium, right? Inspections of online gaming companies will also increase to check that the time limits are being enforced, the regulator said. The earlier rules had limited children's online game playing to an hour and a half, not 3 hours. 90 minutes per day, rising to 3 hours on holidays. Like, can you just think about it? Some of you game for 3 hours in a day. Well, we could all look up on our Instagram or your Snapchat, because your phone will sometimes tell you collectively how much time you've been on an app in a week, right? It's easy to lose 3 hours online in an afternoon. The move reflects the long-running concern about the impact of excessive gaming on the young.
Is it just 1 hour a day? Or
I think it's 1 hour, from my understanding of it, over the weekend.
Only weekends?
Only allowed between 8 to 9. It's from Friday night to Sunday.
Why would they increase the time on holidays? That's a time to be spent with family.
I guess maybe they're trying to give them something, right?
But if you think about it, eventually they just won't even have any more drive you to try to get on your video games.
Yeah, they'll lose an interest if you can only be on it for that.
So
That's
that's
not-
what you're trying to do.
I don't know, but yeah, that could be a possible outcome.
That's not exactly true, because apparently, if you restrict video games from people who really love to play it, they'll just
Yes.
want to play it more. So then
There is an
if they were to
addictive.
get free, if they were to that law were to leave, they would have just went right back at it because it was free reign. So then they
Yeah.
would spend all the time they could on it, right?
Yeah, on the psychology side of things, there is a physical addiction too. You can be physically addicted to things. It's kind of the same as phone separation anxiety. where we get so attached to just having the whatever it is with you that when there's a physical separation, it can cause physical reactions of anxiety. There is the addictive element because it's based on, it hits your reward part of your brain, the reward center of the brain. Like the people that create games, there are the techniques and ways of actually manipulating you to do that, right? And so it says here that they claimed that many teenagers had become addicted to online gaming and it was having a negative impact on them. So that's decision makers, politicians making that claim. I'm sure they have science to back it up. But they, in this society, have the authority to do something about it. The article prompted significant falls in the value of the shares from some of China's biggest online gaming firms. For example, here in July, Chinese gaming giant announced it was rolling out facial recognition to stop children playing games between. This would be 10 o'clock to 8 in the morning, I guess. Yeah, that would be what that is. 10 p.m. to 8. So they're using facial recognition so that you can't play. Like, that's pretty interesting. It's why so many people have the little tape over your laptop camera, right? Yeah. So some things to consider there. In Canada, you can put this here. For us, anyway, it is the same in other countries, but we're switching specifically into talking about Canada stuff now, okay? So we've had a bit of an introduction into some of the legal thinking, the ways to kind of break down issues. So we're going to talk here in this first section here a little bit about the morals and how they relate to legal issues. That morals actually, for us, you could draw an arrow. Whatever we as our society, whatever our morals are, they're going to guide what the laws are, whether it's civil laws or criminal laws, things like that. And so if you think about it, the things that we have criminal laws protecting are the things that we value most in society, right? And it also relates to whatever punishments will exist for those. So, for example, I added more space here in this document. We have many examples in our society where moral beliefs on issues determine the legality of those issues. And I'll give you an example, unless anybody wants to give me an example offhand. Can you think of a law that's kind of recent in the last maybe 20 years or 10 years? And that law is new because we wanted to protect some part of Canadian society. What's that? Child pornography?
Yeah.
You know what? Let's add that. We're talking about.
Oh, sorry.
We're talking about making or distributing.
Yeah, when last year? Yeah, last year they.
From sexting or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's now laws. So you can write that down as your first example. This is new, I think, within the last 13 years.
Yeah, well, probably when the newer
Smartphones or Snapchat, and so that's the good point to make is that, and I'm going to write this just in a different color for my own benefit. I will say here, when the need arose to protect people because of so many smartphones. The law was created. So you can kind of go like that. When the need arose, the law was created. And that'll just go with all of them. Because obviously you don't have a law when there isn't a threat or danger present, right? Can you think of some other examples of things that are now unlawful or not legal that have been made, laws made to protect this topic or whatever, because society's viewpoint on these issues has changed.
When did they legalize marijuana?
So marijuana was legalized, I think that was 2015.
Man, it's been that long.
Well, yeah, and then they probably did that because some people wouldn't do it illegally.
It was being used to,
It's for health purposes, because if you go and buy dope from some like guy on the street, it's not safe because you don't know exactly
Well,
what.
the stuff that gets you high is the THC, but the stuff that helps you is the CBD.
Yeah.
The CBD is what you want if you want to be cured.
okay.
That's what I've heard.
So,
Well, my mom has these. They're called. I don't know what they're called, but there's some sort of like they have marijuana in it, and it helps like calm the muscles or something.
yes,
like that.
there are those things for sure.
Yeah.
The other part to this, just so to make that clarification, is it's that they didn't say, okay, all the marijuana that people are trafficking on the street and that the biker gangs are doing all the stuff, they're not saying that all that becomes legal now. So then it was legally provided, right? So there are government growers, for example, that have contracts. It's tested, it's regulated, right? So there is another part to it. So just for clarification's sake, we're not just taking something that is dangerous on the streets and saying, okay, it's everyone have at it now, because that's not the case.
You know what I heard?
What's?
In the state of California, like marijuana is legal.
Oh,
I heard that like any money made from like a shop like that
yeah.
can't be, or like they don't do business with banks, or like banks in California don't allow business with.
From the legal marijuana shops?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So don't you have to get some sort of like insurance or something, or like some sort of pass to go and like grow your own?
Oh, I think there's there's a limitation. You can, I think, grow as many as 3 on your own.
Oh, okay.
I think that's how it goes. And actually, there's another. So that's the thing about this kind of class. It just brings up all of these cases that you just aren't on your mind. There was a case in Saskatoon with a student. There was a student who, I don't know, had something and was given a doctor's prescription to marijuana. But so because it was medication prescribed, he would come in and smell of marijuana or something like that and was sent home by the school. There was some kind of thing where he was told he couldn't smoke it on school grounds or whatever. And he contested that because it was it is his medicine. And so technically, now that's where you have to kind of meet in the middle, because it wouldn't look great if you've got one kid that's sitting out the door. You're not allowed to smoke on school property, but this kid, because it's a medicine pass, can smoke outside that there has to be some balance and reasonable agreement made there. But that came up as well.
Just for medical, do it at your house.
Do it at your house?
And then don't bring it into the public.
Yeah, I guess because you don't take a lot of all sorts of medications, elsewhere. Here's another one. At one point, homosexuality was a crime in Canada. Police could knock on your door and come in and arrest you.
Wait, so why did they change it?
There is a famous phrase by a politician in Canada that said, it's not Canada's business what you do in your bedroom.
It's not Canada's business what they do in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's something in the bedroom.
Technically, okay, but you get the idea that it's, and this is why, and there are movies that were made to show this, and in some countries it still is. Some countries it's the death penalty, right? But we've moved on from that, and again, this is an example of moral acceptance changing. If you think about the span of that, from the time when it was a crime to now that marriage is, same-sex marriage, Maybe not to everybody's approval, but same-sex marriage is legal. I think that was 2004. Does that sound right?
2005.
2005. I always look to you because we've brought this up many times. So just think about that something was unlawful at one point, criminalized, and now very mainstream, kind of, and accepted. Can anybody think of, there was another thing happening in Canada here, and it came up recently in the federal government. Some cities have created bans on this practice. Some provinces have instituted whole province bans. And at the federal Canada level, they're working on creating a federal Canada ban of this practice. Does anybody know?
Is that thing to like make you not?
Yeah, conversion therapy.
What's that?
Conversion therapy is, so you know what conditioning is? Like if I do something over and over and over, if it's a negative thing, eventually you'll get really, anxious whenever that thing comes up. So for example, some people will use it in torture. They'll shock you for different things so that you'll be conditioned to do a behavior to avoid the shock. And there's the therapy, and therapy implies that this is a treatment to homosexuality. That there are some programs or groups who believe that you can convert a gay person to become straight by introducing to them a lot of discomfort whenever they're thinking or seeing homosexual images or talking about homosexuality. And so that, what's that?
Wait, but did it actually work?
It didn't pass yet, but that doesn't mean that that's not going to be reintroduced when the next government is formed. But places like Vancouver has banned it, Edmonton, Calgary, I'm not sure if
everywhere but here in Alberta.
so other whole provinces, right? Yeah. And the point is that what they're saying is, now if a province or a city bans it, then so far right now, that means that it's only unlawful and it would result in like a fine penalty. There's so far no criminal code element to it where somebody will face criminal charges if they're found to be doing this.
But if this works,
No.
oh.
Yeah, it causes a lot of distress for people. Yeah. Yes.
I remember you talking about this at one point, but I can't remember whether it was like in Canada or not. Yes. And you mentioned something about like legalizing prostitution.
Yes. Prostitution is another. Now, it's really interesting. Great addition. Thanks for that, Jackson.
Yes.
I didn't say
Like I've just said, cinnamon buns. Ooh. Prostitution. Ooh. Okay. Because that's what happened. Let's just be clear. Okay.
Did you just gasp or something?
Okay, 13 years ago, prostitution was the topic I would use to talk about decriminalizing. And that's different than legalizing. Legalizing. 13 years ago, because I'm on year 14 of teaching here, and I was teaching Law 30 when I started here, prostitution was a topic that we discussed and actually used for debate about the pros and cons of and when we say decriminalizing, we're saying that it's no longer an offense, but it's not technically legal. So that you're no longer charged for it. Prostitution used to be a crime. And actually, again, it's very recent, and there were some kind of discrepancies, or it was a bit wonky about what was a crime. You can't advertise for the purposes of prostitution. So you can't offer prostitution. That's the illegal part of it, right? Yeah. And like other laws that we have had, there was another element to it that was gender biased. Because oftentimes the penalty went to, the prostitute, and it was oftentimes women. If it's men that are purchasing a service, shouldn't they have an equal consequence to it as well?
No.
But
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Let me finish the question before you answer. But yeah, there was a gender bias to us. And we do have other examples in our, not necessarily in the criminal code, but in just Canada's, like the whole Indian Act was a really good example. And I don't know if we'll get to that. We'll get to that probably in our history class in second semester. But that again is the progression. And what we're talking about here is that as the moral beliefs shift, right? Moral beliefs shift, and then the laws shift. As moral beliefs shift, the laws shift. For example, another example is the danger of online predators. Oh, and now what was her name? Todd. There was Amanda Todd. Do you guys know Amanda Todd? This is a while ago now already.
We learned about
Yeah,
it.
we learned
We
about
learned about it in
Yeah.
whatever it's called.
A while ago. A young girl was kind of convinced to give a sexy photo or a revealing photo to someone, and then that person used it to bully and kind of coerce her into different things. She was afraid of the bullying that would happen if it was, revealed. I don't know if he did or didn't, but she killed herself was the thing. There are new laws for that. New laws have been created for online protections. For example, and I don't know if it's a documentary that you'd be interested in watching because it's a bit dated now, but there was a girl online in Canada who was in kind of a chat group, and this tells you how old this is.
do you like when you watch?
Well, so far the description sounds familiar. She was in a bit of a chat room to talk about, suicide, feelings of suicide, and she thought that she was in a supportive chat room, and she had gotten to know a few different people. It was an international chat, as online can be. And so she formed what she thought was a friendship with a nurse. It was a person she thought was a female nurse. And that person was also claiming to be suicidal, and they were trying to encourage each other. But at one point, they made a suicide pact. This young teenage girl, newly moved out to go to university at some place in Ontario, and this online female nurse that she had developed a friendship with, they made a suicide pact. And it was the nurse that kind of directed her and said, I've seen this all the time from people coming in who've had attempted suicide and it wasn't successful, so then they just hurt themselves. So here's how we have to do it. This is the type of rope we have to get. This is the knot you have to tie. Here's the night. Let's agree on a night. It was all negotiated, facilitated by and encouraged by this female nurse. And what's interesting about this is that there was a woman overseas, Ireland or something like that was aware of this, had seen little clips of the conversation between these other two. And at one point, this female nurse accidentally had her webcam on for a moment, and she was able to grab a screen grab, and it wasn't a woman behind the camera. And in the end, that young girl did attempt suicide. She jumped into the river. She didn't do the rope thing, and she died. But it was this woman who had kind of observed the negotiating, the manipulating, that contacted all sorts of different authorities. And in the end, they tracked it down that it was a man. It wasn't a suicidal person. It was someone that was enjoying the manipulation of encouraging and walking a young girl through her suicide. It wasn't a crime at the time, but again, we create new laws as new laws are needed. And so that's another example. We create new laws. We'll start back again here as new laws are needed.
Yeah, that's not the movie I was thinking about. I was thinking about the one with the chick from Hannah Montana. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she made a fake account.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, because it is a danger, but it didn't exist as a danger until the internet came, right?